Today's guest and presenter of this webinar is Professor Naseem Smith. She's a teacher with over 20 years experience in the field of special education needs. She has taught students with exceptionalities and currently heads public school for students with special educational needs on the island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. She has also lectured teachers and training on aspects of special education and conducted seminars across the Caribbean region in Central America. Naseem is currently pursuing her PhD at the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill campus. So welcome, Naseem.
Welcome everyone to the webinar. No, I'm not a professor. My name is just Naseem, but we move along. Today we talk about dyslexia, discovering and tapping into the potential. The idea behind this webinar, because dyslexia is a specific reading disorder and it affects academic performance, I know that it causes frustration for not only the students, but for their parents and for you, the teachers, because we are aware that individuals with dyslexia possess exceptional capabilities to use their brain. We are here to discover what type of educational intervention we can use to assist these students, because we said we agree that they have extraordinary abilities. So in the webinar, we will talk about basics of dyslexia and also intervention strategies that we can use to enhance their talents and their creativity. We are going to discover by the end of the webinar what is a learning disability, because dyslexia is under the category of learning disability, and there are several types of learning disabilities. We will talk about what dyslexia is and how dyslexia affects students. How do the students with dyslexia use their brain? Because if we probably know this, then we would know how to help them. And finally, what are the intervention strategies that we can use? Teachers and parents, how we can use intervention strategies to enhance their gifts and their talents. Now, disabilities are diagnosed by trained professionals, and I repeat, trained professionals. Most times, a combination of medical practitioners and probably psychologists. They use standardized measures and they administer certain tests when these individuals are diagnosed. When they administer these tests, there are certain measures and guidelines that they use to determine which category students with disabilities fall in, or whether or not they have a disability. There is also something called the DSM at the bottom of the screen there you see. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. They use that to guide the definition of disabilities. Now, the DSM is into its 4th edition. So when these professionals administer the standardized tests, depending on your performance on these tests and the guidelines set out by the DSM-5, learning disability is a neurological disorder. It affects the brain's ability to perceive information, to process information, store information, and respond. In order for you to have a learning disability, there must be a significant discrepancy between your potential for learning and what you actually learn. Remember at the beginning, I said that certain standardized measures are used. One of these measures used is called an IQ test. So you would try to measure the individual's intelligence quotient. Now, when these tests are administered, there are guidelines on what is called a normal bell curve where you would fall. So average individuals would fall between, let's say, a range of 85 to about 115 on this bell curve. Persons with exceptional abilities, the ones who are gifted, would probably weigh in at about 130 or somewhere up there. And the ones who are intellectually challenged would fall below 85. That would depend on the severity of the disability. So when individuals with learning disabilities are assessed, you would see that they have a great potential to perform. However, when they're in the classroom and every day, what they actually do, there is a huge gap between what the test says that they can do and what they actually do. There are 3 types of learning disabilities as described by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. We have the specific reading disorder called dyslexia, that we'll be elaborating on today. You may also have a specific math disorder known as dyscalculia, and there's also a disorder of written expression or writing known as dysgraphia. Dyslexia is the most significant type of learning disability. Remember, we said that there are 3 types, but dyslexia is the most significant type. This learning disability affects the person's language skills, and it's more so evident in the area of reading. Dyslexia makes it difficult for the individual to excel academically, because most individuals with dyslexia are highly intelligent or they possess exceptional talent or creative skills. Why are we so concerned about learning disabilities? This is because it predicts one's academic achievement, and your academic achievement is hinged on school failure, which therefore predicts what happens in the future for the student. Dyslexia would affect your attention, your memory, your coordination, the way in which you socialize. So in other words, the individual with dyslexia struggles with reading, but otherwise they're highly intelligent. So my first question to you this afternoon, do you know any famous person or persons with dyslexia? I'll let you think about that for half a minute. Yes, I see persons are typing. Who do you know? It's famous. Yes, Agatha Christie. Anybody else? Definitely. Albert Einstein was way up there. I'm sure he measured really high on the IQ test. Yes, Richard Branson. Yes, Robin Williams. Anybody else? We must all know Whoopi Goldberg. She is also a famous individual with dyslexia. Thomas Edison. Muhammad Ali. Steven Spielberg. Harry Belafonte. And we know most of these individuals. Again, I said that these individuals have problems with reading, but they're otherwise highly intellectual or extremely creative. Yes, Da Vinci. So we continue. We look now at the characteristics of students with dyslexia. Now, because of the limitations of this webinar, these characteristics were summarized, and this is not an exhaustive list, so I'm sure that you would read about others. These students, they have difficulty when processing text and numbers, so they would always want your help. Spelling and reading is extremely difficult for them, and basic facts. Because it's a neurological disorder, the way in which the brain perceives the letters that they're seeing, it is assumed that they're also seeing these letters upside down and backwards, because the way in which they would attempt to call words or to write certain things. So they're reading, for example, the word dog, but their brain is perceiving it as God. They also have a tendency to confuse those letters that would look similar and appear similar but are opposites, and you see the examples there. The E and the C look very similar, so their brains have difficulty in differentiating. The P's, D's, Q, P, the M and the W, the U and the N, the H's and the Y's. If you look at these individuals' attempt at writing, you would see that they misplace these letters. It's because of the way in which the brain is perceiving what is seen. In addition, these are the students with extremely messy handwriting. These are the students whose books are almost in pieces because they have erased so much because of their errors. They also hold their pencil strangely, and you would wonder, why is this child holding it that way? They also have difficulty with sequencing and following directions. I have an example there. So if I say to a student, can you take this book to the principal's office and collect some reward stickers? Most times, the student would only remember the part about the reward stickers. So they can't process all of that. There's a sequence of events and they have trouble. These students also place letters of the words in the wrong place, and they can't recall the events in a story. So when you're asking them to retell a story, and even if you give them a clue and said, first in the story, this is what happened, and you pause, what happened next? A lot of the times they're lost because they can't recall the events. And in terms of placing the letters wrong, they may spell a word and put the last letter before as the penultimate letter. These individuals also ask for directions to be repeated, and they need constant reminders if they have tasks to complete. This is also very evident when we give them homework tasks. So we have to be reminding them that you need to do this one on a Monday, or at 10 o'clock on a Friday, this is what happens. Now, research by Davis and Braun discovered that despite the fact that each individual is different and they have different groups of problems, most individuals with dyslexia have an exceptional capacity to use their brain, or what is called mental functions. They have these 8 common mental functions. So as you can see, individuals with dyslexia, they have an exceptional ability to alter and create perceptions. They are also highly aware of their environment. They have what is called a picture thinking mode. That is, they can think in pictures rather than in words. Remember, we said that it affects reading. They are also more curious than the average person that you'd meet. So when you were giving me examples of these famous persons with dyslexia, now if they were not as highly curious, maybe they would not have been as successful. So individuals with dyslexia, they are curious about how things work, and they're extremely consistent until they discover how what it is they're thinking about works. They're highly intuitive and insightful. These individuals also use all of their senses. They think and they perceive multidimensionally. They have vivid imaginations. They can also experience thought as reality. And when they explain it to you, you would discover that there is no way that you can convince these individuals that no, you were thinking about it and this is not real, because their brains can do that to them. Now, if we look again at all of these abilities, we are going to tap into what is here when it's time for educational intervention. So we know that this is how the brain works. For example, point number 6, their ability to use all their senses to experience multiple views of the world. We need to think about that in particular at the classroom level when we're teaching these students. Now, if the abilities of these individuals with dyslexia are not suppressed, and sometimes these abilities can be suppressed by our educational system or by their parents or relatives, they can make them as frustrated. They can either result in two things. Individuals with dyslexia can have either higher than normal intelligence, or they can have an extraordinary creative ability. So either of two things. If we allow them and if we enhance these gifts and talents, they're highly intellectual or extremely creative. So my second question to you now, do you think, based on our discussion thus far, do you think that dyslexia is a disability or a gift? Someone says an opportunity, a gift, maybe, but the slide says if the abilities are not suppressed. So maybe if they're suppressed, then it would probably be a disability. Okay. There are actually researchers who argue that dyslexia is not a disability and it should be categorized as a gift. Yes, yes. So that is why we are here. Those of us in the education system, how do we make accommodations for individuals with these gifts or these talents? What can we do at the classroom level to enhance their gifts or their talents? If we agree that these individuals possess gifts or they are extremely talented, for those of us in the classroom, what can we do? How can we intervene? There are different teaching methods, and these teaching methods that we're going to discuss, we're going to use them to activate different parts of the brain. Remember when we spoke about earlier on a previous slide about certain characteristics and how they use their brain, we spoke about how they can think multidimensionally. So we want to use multisensory strategies in order to enhance their gifts and their talents. These multisensory strategies integrate visual aspects, auditory, tactile, and kinesthetic information to enhance learning of persons with dyslexia. And I wish to say here that these strategies can be used with other students who are not diagnosed with dyslexia. It would be interesting to see how interesting our classrooms would be if we use these strategies with other students. So the visual techniques first. When we are teaching students about strategies or techniques, we should not only teach them the learning strategy, but we must also remind them when they need to use it and how they must use these strategies. So for the visual learner, and if we think about ourselves and we're honest, we can think about our preferred mode or preferred learning style. So those of us who like to learn visually, we can use pictures, posters in the classroom. We can have models displaying the content that we're talking about. We are now in the age of technology, so of course we are going to use the overhead projector and the computer. We can use flashcards, graphic organizers, and you can see one there on your screen. We can also use art images. We can use text, and we can use something called idea mapping. It's not on the slide. Now, if I'm teaching, for example, the concept of, let's say, government. So I'm going to ask my class to brainstorm about government. And after the brainstorming, I'm going to jot down all about the discussion on what is called a visual map. So I would start probably in the middle or at the top with the big heading government, and I can draw all these arrows. One person might say that in a certain part of the world, it's democratic, so we have to talk about democracy under government. In another part of the globe, it might be a republic state. We might have certain parts of the world where there's a military regime. What about things like the monarchy? And when I think about the monarchy, visually, I can probably draw a crown for the queen or the king. All of these subheading on that map, I can ask students to do further research and let them bring all of these ideas in the classroom and stick them onto this map. We move on. There are also auditory techniques. There are books on tape, pair-assisted reading. We can have computerized text. We can use film and videos accompanying audio. Music, we can sing in our classrooms. Instruments, rhymes, clapping. I wish to point out here that literacy does not depend upon reading text in books. If we probably ask our students to vote, they'll tell us that it's boring. They want to embrace the technology. So I repeat, literacy does not depend upon reading text in books. Let's put those books on tapes, or if I have to read, why not record my voice on my cell phone, on a CD, and play it for the students? If I'm talking, for example, about the jungle, why don't I play an audio with sounds from the jungle? Why can't I use instruments with similar sounds? Do we develop rhymes in our classrooms? Do we ask the students to clap in order to enhance their memory? All of those are auditory techniques that we can use. Now we move on to something I use called Gimme 5 strategy. I use it to enhance listening. Now this strategy, when I'm about to do something that requires a lot of listening, sometimes I have a diagram in my class, but I also put my hand up and I say, let's check. Am I looking at you, at the person who is speaking? So my pinky finger, and the students would look around and they would also monitor each other. Where is my mouth? Are my lips quiet? What about my body? Am I moving about or am I still? Where are my ears? Are they turned on or am I listening? What about my hands? Are they free? So we need to do a check. So let's check. My eyes are involved. My mouth, I'm patiently listening. My body is still. My ears, my hands are free. And I'm giving all of my attention to the speaker. Because a lot of the times, these type of students fidget. So we need to do the check. And maybe in the middle of what they're listening to, if we find a student who is not paying attention, we probably just put our hands up or we point on the wall and we show them which part that they need to deal with. So when the student starts fidgeting, for example, we point to the finger that says your body needs to be still. If we think they're not listening, then we point to this one and the ear. Continuing, we look at the tactile techniques. I don't know how many of us are familiar with raised letters. We use them a lot in the early years in school. Now, these raised letters, and we can put on letter tiles, they can use them to guide their spelling. I pointed out earlier that sometimes they tend to jumble their letters when they're attempting to spell. So if we assist them by modeling it out in front of them on the tiles or on the blocks, they can see when they're copying, for example, that the letter N comes before the E and the letter I comes before the N and so forth, if they're spelling 9. Do we use finger paint and puzzles? So as long as the students are manipulating and touching these things, chances are it's activating something in the brain. We can also use clay and Play-Doh for them to spell the word that's giving them trouble. So as the teacher, I may know, for example, that the particular student is having trouble with a particular word and I'm gonna come armed with my Play-Doh or my clay. I have also seen flour being used and you carve it out and allow the student to spell the word and it's right there in front of them. You can also use coins and dominoes. The kinesthetic techniques, we want their bodies to move. So we know that they have a lot of energy. Why don't we have a game or spell the difficult word while jumping rope? Why don't we have the students clap and count and sing while they're learning the difficult aspect of the concept? Maybe I'm doing a quiz and I'm asking them words with silent E, for example. I may have a beanbag or a ball. and I'm throwing it, and maybe the person who catches the ball get to win the prize, but you must catch the ball in order to answer the question. We have what is also called air writing. The student is moving. So let's say the difficult letter is the letter S or the letter P. You see the child there writing the numeral 6. Let the child get up and do this in the air. Let the child try to do this in the air. And he or she is moving his or her body. I also want to point out that there is a successful resource for parents and teachers, a multisensory reading program for those of us who are interested in phonics, called Toe by Toe. Toe by Toe, written by Cowling and Cowling. It's a British publication. This is a step-by-step set of activities. It's in one book and it has instructions for the teacher, for the coach, for the parent. The phonics activities are set up in a grid, and the student must attempt the sound of the letter or the sound of the word 3 correct times. Now you have a grid with about 5 times that you can score. So if the student gets it right, you put a mark. If the student gets it incorrect, you put a dash, but you know that they need to have 3 consecutive correct checks for you to move on. You get to put the date and you get to monitor. The students are asked to say the sounds of the letters. Sometimes they use nonsense words, nonsense sentences. But in terms of the multisensory aspect, the students get to say the sound, say the word or the sentences. They hear themselves and they also see the success of what's happening on the grid. So if you're interested, I would suggest, like for the parents, or if you are using phonics in your classroom, you can check out this resource material called Toe by Toe. It's a little red book and it is very powerful. All right, we're moving on. Now, the student with dyslexia requires a classroom because of what's happening in their brain. They require a classroom that is structured, one that is calm, one that is quiet. I have also seen where there are suggestions that we can use certain scents in our classroom to keep it nice and quiet. Aromatherapy. We can use peppermint and cinnamon and so forth in the classroom to keep the students calm. I don't know how many of us want to try that or have tried that. When we're giving them instructions, we must remember not to give them a series of instructions. Let's try to limit it to 1 or 2 at a time. Short, very simple instructions. And after we have given them the instructions, we must say to the student to ensure that they have understood, what do you think you heard me say? Sometimes we would be surprised at what we said and what the student perceived and is now saying that they understood the instructions to say. So it's always good that we ask them to repeat. What did you hear me say? All right. We spoke about the multisensory approach. We're using the visual, the auditory, the tactile, the kinesthetic, but it would be fun if we can use it all together, not just in isolation. And we know our students, so we would know which student comes alive if there's music, and which student comes alive when he or she uses his or her hands. So we must remember when we are planning to plan with all of this in mind, because remember, their brains, they think multidimensionally. After we have attempted these approaches and we have given them instructions and we try to keep the classroom nice and orderly, we must also remember that these students require time to process what they've heard. So we may need to pause and give them a little time. Sometimes it is also helpful for us to pair them up with a partner, with a friend, with a coach to explain again what the task is if we're putting them in groups. In addition to the time for them to respond, the time for them to process what was said, we must also give them time to respond. Sometimes we have students who would always want to answer the questions first. So maybe we need to say, I'm going to ask you this question. And when I ask, I'm going to give you 1 minute to think about it. So that would also give the child with dyslexia a fair chance to think and process the instruction that is given. We must remember also that they may require extra time in order to complete their assignments. So we need to make sure that they understand the instructions. We must give them time to process what was said. We should give them also time to respond, and they may require additional time to complete their tasks and assignments. Now, because of the time limitation of the webinar, we have not gone into certain accommodations that we can utilize when we're doing assessment of these students. But there are also specific accommodations that we can use for students with dyslexia. But in the interim, I would love for us to try the multisensory strategies. And remember, when we're planning, we need to think about the student who prefers to use his or her eyes, his ears, his hands, and the ones with lots of energy who want to move about.